Welcome to Arts Express. This is Prairie Miller, and on the show, Arts News. And those were sounds from the wave of underpaid teachers' protests and walkouts that have swept the nation. In this case, the music teachers staging a protest on the steps of the state capitol in Louisville, Kentucky, and in a protest performance of We're Not Gonna Take It. And later in the show, to address the double-edged sword of that now iconic song being embraced by both the left and the right in this country, is its creator, Twisted Sister's Dee Snider. Coming up. Everybody once again! We're not gonna take it! We can't hear you! No, we're not gonna take it! Let them hear it! We're not gonna take it And next, the holiday season is the biggest time of the year for shopping, and here to report about that is Jason Unruh, though it's not the kind of shopping you may be thinking.
As the pandemic continues to impoverish more and more people in the United States, one industry is at least growing. No, not Amazon, although it's also growing too. Shoplifting is growing. Now, since the pandemic started, Capital Supermarket says that thefts have gone up by more than double. The amount of people coming into the store stealing has more than doubled. And this is a thing that is industry-wide, especially for grocery stores and big box stores like Walmart, who tend to be the primary victims of shoplifting. So it's interesting that as people are getting poorer and struggling to make ends meet, shoplifting increases. I know, it's weird. It's like there's a connection between poverty and crime. But some people, at least one person from Capital Supermarket said at least once a day he spots someone slipping a package of meat, package of rice, food, or whatever under their skirt or into their jacket, diapers, shampoo, laundry detergent. Aren't these necessities? These aren't treats. These aren't luxury items. These are the staple things that you need to get by. Interviews with more than a dozen retailers have shown that there has been a shift away from regular consumer goods that would be considered non-essential to things that would be essential. So retailers, security experts, police departments across the country say what's being taken is more like staples, like bread, pasta, or baby formula. If you're at the point in your life where you need to steal baby formula, you're in a pretty bad situation. And I, for one, don't really feel like getting mad at someone for having to steal baby food. I mean, that's kind of really messed up. So, you know what I mean? But what's important here is that security experts, grocery stores, police officers are recognizing that these thefts are of basic staple foods, things that people need to survive. Now, at the same time, more than 20 million Americans are on some form of unemployment assistance, with 12 million about to run out of benefits the day after Christmas unless Congress gets around to kind of approving something. Right now it stands at about $908 billion, most of which goes to private companies, and particularly the very large ones, many of whom don't even need it. So, it's already an estimated 54 million Americans struggle with hunger this year. That's a very misleading statistic, considering that hunger defined in the United States is different than how hunger is defined across the world. Internationally, hunger is defined as, did you miss a meal due to poverty? Whereas in the United States, it is, did you have enough at every meal? So it's kind of a misleading statistic. Again, another divide between the first and the third world. However, what is significant here is that it is a 45% increase from 2019. People who are essentially saying that they are food insecure. So what's important here is how much it's grown due to the pandemic year that has been 2020 and is mercifully almost over. And this is all data that has been released by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, because they're the guys who know about food. Now, at the same time, in past years, SNAP, WIC, all those things designed to help people get food, have been cut by President Trump. Many of the people needing that are his supporters. Middle America, some of the working poor, right wing, etc., who have very clearly acted against their own interest and are continuing to defend acting against their own interest today. Food banks are reporting shortages, like demand being higher than ever before. Food banks, pantries, they're being inundated with more people than have ever been before. You saw previously with Texas, the very long line of people's cars lining up to go to the food bank, while at the same time continuing to insist on wasting resources by contesting the election. Rather than, the people that are going hungry kind of thing. Because that's priorities in Texas society. Only way to think about that. But what's remarkable here is that despite this continuing to grow, mass amounts of people continue to support Donald Trump. Now, I'm not singing the praises of Joe Biden. He's a complete tool. What's interesting is the insistence upon acting against one's own interests because of essentially conspiracy theories. And it's mind-boggling to me as an outsider, someone who's outside the United States looking in going, oh my God, what are you doing? It's something like that. Many of us in the world are kind of looking at you in this way. But hunger is increasing across the country due to the pandemic. And it's about to get a lot worse after Christmas. So I think it's about time that maybe Congress got up off its ass and did something. Because it's important to warn you, the public, of how bad things really are. Because you can't decide what to do, or how to act, or how to react, unless you have the proper information in front of you. And that is what you need to know. And that is the purpose of this. Reporting from Niagara Falls, Jason Unruh.
And that was Arts News for this week. And coming up next on Arts Express, when I got invited to Washington to testify with Frank Zappa and John Denver, I was honored to go and represent rock and roll. But when I left, a reporter stuck a mic in my face and said, "Dee, how do you feel?" And the word that came out of my mouth was dirty. Here's Twisted Sister's Dee Snider talking about attacks against him at that 1985 Senate music censorship hearing, the subsequent hounding by the FBI against him, and much more, including a holiday song he's created despite the ongoing pandemic. First, another song of his that's enduring through the decades, and his misgivings that it's been embraced by the right-wing QAnon as well.
All right, mister, what do you think you're doing? You call this a room? This is a pigsty. I want you to straighten up this area now!
I want to rock.
Hey, Prairie.
Hi, how are you?
Good, loving your name. Great name.
Oh, okay. Well, your children have great names too.
Yes, well, I'm a spaghetti western junkie, so they all got cowboy and cowgirl names.
Okay, and welcome to our show.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, with the release of The Magic of Christmas Day, would you say that's a new and different direction for you?
You know, I think people, hopefully by this point, have come to expect the unexpected from Dee Snider. I mean, I've done a Broadway album called Dee Does Broadway where I did metal show tunes. And Twisted Sister did an album quite a few years ago called Twisted Christmas, which was metal covers of Christmas songs. So I think people have come to expect the unexpected. But when I first wrote it, which was over 30 years ago at the behest of my wife who asked me to write her a Christmas song, that's like late 80s. And I didn't want anyone to know that Dee Snider had written a Christmas song at that point. That would have been image killing. But at this point, nobody really knows what to make of my image.
And what can you say about releasing your positive music during this pandemic, and did that reality influence you?
Very much, very, very much, Prairie. First of all, so this is the only song I ever wrote not for commercial release. I had session musicians record it. It was a gift from my wife. Merry Christmas, Suzette. We've been together 44 years now. So, and that was that. Done. Mid-90s, I get a phone call. The engineer who worked on my session is now a producer, producing Celine Dion's Christmas record. She's looking for new music. He plays her, my wife's song. She wants to record it. So it winds up being on her album, These Are Special Times, and sells 14 million copies of that record. It's one of the biggest selling holiday record in history. And but now this year is a very difficult time for everybody, and reflecting on how we seem to be at each other's throats, really, and reflecting on the spirit of the magic of Christmas Day, which was that Christmas was the time, the holidays were the time where we set our differences aside, even for a few hours. We came together as family, as friends, and then, you know what I mean, and we celebrated. And that seems gone. Even with the COVID thing, families are at each other's throats. Friends are at each other's throats this year. And I'm hoping the message seeps in and reminds people. I mean, Barry, during World War I, there was a ceasefire called during Christmas, and the Germans and the Allies came out of the trenches, put down their guns, and celebrated Christmas on the battlefield together. This is true. There was a movie made about this. And then the next day they went back to shooting each other. But for a moment, they were human beings. They were people. And they said, hey, let's not forget that. So I'm hoping to send this message out there.
And speaking of being each other's throats, what can you say about when your phone was tapped and mail checked by the FBI after you challenged the censorship in music hearings?
You know, when I got invited to Washington to testify in '85 with Frank Zappa and John Denver, may they both rest in peace, you know, I was honored to go and represent rock and roll. But I walked out of that there feeling very disappointed in what I witnessed up close. You know, as I left the room, a reporter stuck a mic in my face and said, Dee, how do you feel? As I left my testimony. And the word that came out of my mouth was dirty. I was really disappointed. Even though it was in the 80s and I was a rocker, I still had an idea. I thought that Washington was somehow still a better place, but it wasn't. And after that, yes, my mail was checked, my packages were checked, my phones were tapped. I became public enemy number one. Why? Because I spoke my mind, and maybe I embarrassed some of the politicians with being intelligent and drug-free and reasonable and making sense about why censorship is wrong. So it was a disheartening time. But I feel like I did the right thing, and people seem, over the years, appreciation for it has grown.
Oh, yeah. And regarding the look and identity, Twisted Sister, you once said, I went for an outrageous form of expressing myself to show that I was somebody. Please elaborate.
Well, Twisted Sister was, first of all, I was an attention hog, the oldest child in an entire family of six, plus the oldest cousin and nephew and grandchild. For a brief moment in time, I was the star child, but then as everybody started having kids, I was shoved aside. So I really wanted attention. Then you bring out, when Twisted started, it was the disco era. And for rock and roll, the scene was dead, and bands were expected to be heard and not seen. Play the hits. Nobody wants to see you. And so Twisted Sister was being defiant and dressing up, literally wearing women's clothing back then, just to make people go, what the heck is that? And that's what it was all about. Get attention, get a reaction, because damn it, I will not go quietly into the night. So really, I was looking for attention, and we got it.
And what are your thoughts about the many manifestations of the iconic song, We're Not Gonna Take It, across the years, including teachers' strikes in West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and elsewhere?
Well, on CBS Sunday morning, they showed a bunch of elderly who were quarantining in homes. They Zoomed a version of "We're Not Going to Take It," of all these elderly people singing "We're Not Going to Take It." The song has transcended the metal genre. It's transcended the 80s. It's transcended the 80s, and now it's really a folk song. I mean, it's just everybody knows the song and uses it. It's their go-to. And for many people, I think 2020 has been the year of "We're Not Going to Take It" on all sides. So sometimes I'm honored and pleased, like with the teachers, and when I see those elderly people using the song. And then other times, I'm not too happy about it when QAnon now has a video using "We're Not Going to Take It." So, I mean, but, this is the spirit of the song, and I'm supposed to be Mr. Anti-Censorship, but I'll tell you, sometimes I can't help it. I've got to speak out because people remember the first line of the first verse is, "We've got the right to choose." That's very deliberate. It's a statement I wanted to make. If you're not pro-choice across the board, then you really shouldn't be singing my song, okay? But otherwise, it's amazing to watch the song take on a life of its own.
And what do you feel has been the enduring influence of heavy metal on the music world?
Well, heavy metal, like rock and roll in itself, was thought to be a flash in the pan, come and go. But it is the cockroach of rock and roll and has existed for decades because young people need a way to express dark emotions, anger, frustration, depression, heartbreak. And heavy metal is that form of expression. It really is. And there was a study done that showed that headbangers, as we're called, grow to be better adjusted adults than fans of other music. And I got called by Psychology Today. They said, "Why, Dee?" And I said, "Because we get it out. We let it out, and we feel better after." You've got to let those things go. And at a rock concert, listening to a metal record, you could scream, you could shout, you could bang your head. You're sweaty and you're smiling afterwards, and you feel better for it. It's certainly was a life changer for me. I was an angry young man, and I am a very happy older man right now. And Prairie, with that, I've got to move on. So pleasure talking to you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
across the morning sky. All the birds are leaving. Ah, how can they know it's time for them to go? Before the winter fire, we'll still be dreaming. I do not count the time. Who knows where the time goes? Who knows where the time goes?
Hi, this is Judy Collins on Arts Express, and today I'm telling you, first of all, have a great day, and be sure to remember Arts Express. This is Judy Collins, so cheers.
Sad, deserted shore, your fickle friends are leaving. Ah, but then you know it's time for them to go. But I will still be here. I have no thought of leaving. I do not count the time.
And coming up next, tossing spare change of $600 each to a country plagued with millions of jobless, hungry, and homeless during this pandemic boasts over 5,500 pages of billions of dollars for the military and other countries. And one rather bizarre entry, the U.S. threatening reincarnation sanctions against China. Yes, if China fails to acknowledge the reincarnation of Tibet's Dalai Lama. So with the deplorable current state of relations between the U.S. and China, how will that country hope to fare in the best foreign film category for the Oscars this year? Well, here to address that thorny issue is the director of China's Oscar entry this year, Peter Chan. His mixed media dramatic documentary is Leap, about China's women's volleyball Olympics team through the decades, and touching on much more than volleyball and the many surrounding social, political, historical, and cultural issues. Friends keep telling me this is not the best time, and I wasn't sure if China would decide to submit a film or not to the Oscars. How America is going to receive the film, I can't control, but I made the film with what I believe in. Here's Peter Chan phoning in from Hong Kong.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, Peter, and welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Okay. What are your thoughts about Leap being considered for an Oscar here in the U.S., considering the current state of relations between the U.S. and China?
I think it's I'm a very positive person. I have wishful thinking and all the time, and I think that it's a double-edged sword, and it's very hard to say because we all know that Chinese relationships, not just with the U.S. but also internationally, is as a turning point, and that's one of the reasons why I make the movie, because there are changes in the whole situation. Let's say the re-engagement of China in the 80s, and to today, China is being a power to be reckoned with, and the relationship with different countries. Obviously, and I have friends telling me, this is not the best time, but every year there is a submission for the Oscar Best International Feature from every country, and And China was, I was at one point, I wasn't sure whether Chinese authority decide to submit a film or not. And ultimately, when China decided to submit, I thought that was a very good gesture, at least from the Chinese authority or the Chinese government, that, things haven't changed. But how the world is going to receive and how America is going to receive the film, it's something that I can't control. And I made the film with what I believe in, and I believe the film is not a propaganda film per se. I think the film has, the first half of the film is very much about how China was in the 80s, and the second part of the film did address concerns and also did reflect the reality of how China is, or the young people, the values of the young people have changed from this collectivism to somewhat individualistic, and which is more aligned with the values of the world. And in that respect, the film is to a certain extent not unanimous in its response in China, because people that believe in collectivism, which was totally portrayed in the first half of the film, are finding problems with the second half of the film, because the second half of the film is more about what you want instead of what you want to do for the country. And in that respect, politically, in the film, there were some controversies among internet netizens and how they respond to the film. But I think it's something that I cannot avoid, and I think it's something that I cannot just overlook and just make a film that doesn't have a split in the middle between the first half and the second half, because that's the reality of China. That's a reality of how the world evolves and changes.
Now, your film begins with the quote, "Community first, work together." Please explain and why you began the film with this quote.
I think that line, basically, it's, being from Hong Kong, it's also something that is, we need to connect with the Chinese audience. That is something that is a very Chinese thing in a way for the Chinese audience, that I was not sure that it was absolutely meant for the international audience, but to the film's integrity and the film's entirety, for the fact that for the audience that it's made, I did not take that line out of the Chinese, the international version.
Okay. And what about
Yeah.
your other beginning statement? Women's volleyball represents the spirit of an era. Please elaborate.
That is very important. I mean, that to me is the theme and probably the motif and the whole purpose of making a movie. I'm not a sports fan, and but I've made 2 sports movies now, and I don't even watch a lot of sports movies, to be very honest. To me, what attracted me to this movie about the Chinese women's volleyball national team, it's the 4 decades that it went through, and also the fact that it's not just a sports, and it's not just volleyball, and obviously not just a sports, because it just coincided with the economic reform and the beginning of the open door policy, which is completely a new era and new hope for China back in the late 70s, early 80s. And, for the time that I've been working in China, I live in Hong Kong and grew up in Hong Kong. I've never lived in China, and I've never even been to China, to mainland China, until 1993. And all I've heard about from reading when I was a teenager, and also from all the intellectual friends that I've met in China that I've made through the years, kept telling me about how beautiful the 1980s was. And it's almost like the 60s in the U.S. Again, I missed the 60s because I was born in 62, so I was a bit too young.
Yeah.
So to me, that was almost like someone younger looking back at a very beautiful time of a certain culture, of a certain society. And to me, that was really the main reason. The first half of the movie is the main reason why I wanted to do this film. And then as I was doing research, I was trying to see the ups and downs and the rise and fall, and ultimately the rise again of the volleyball team, the women's volleyball team, and their history in China. It also shows the changes of the Chinese society through the last 4 decades. So to me, those lines were important because Chinese women's volleyball happened at a time, the rise of Chinese women's volleyball happened at a time where China was trying to be engaged with the world after decades of closed-door policy. And there was this eagerness for Chinese to be seen and to be recognized by the world. And that consists of the spirit of the Chinese women's volleyball. And as you see, we put in a little bit of a documentary footages in the beginning of those eyes and those innocent eyes of people who are really yearning to be recognized and to be seen. And I think that sets the tone of the film. And I went to the casting people, not for our lead actors and actresses, but for all the players of the 80s and all the extras that were ended up going to be, employing for the film. I said, you got to give me at least 50 to 60 extras that would be able to follow through in the film and be extras that are more prominent, more in front of the camera, that has that look of innocence and yearning. And to me, that was probably the most important thing for the film.
And I was wondering, because we don't really see the players interacting with the countries that they visit, I was wondering about the Chinese team in Japan in 1981, when not so long ago Japan had committed massacres and war crimes in the millions in China and has yet to apologize, and how the Chinese team felt about that in visiting Japan back then.
I think there is a very peculiar relationship between Japan and China. I mean, even to today, we see a lot of news of, anti-Japanese sentiment, and we also read sometimes that the anti-Chinese sentiment in Japan is higher than anywhere else in the world. And I think that's rightly so, because it's a two-way street, I think that, but the reason that I use the word peculiar is somehow in the economic reform and in the open door policy of China, Japan was the first country that jumped on a bandwagon, if not leading the bandwagon, of befriending China. So there were a lot of interactions between Japan and China. And out of those interactions, whether be it engagement because of what happened in the history and trying to be friendly again, or because of politics or economic reasons, there were, if you look back in the late 70s and the early 80s, and even if you look back at the 60s, because that's really where Chinese women's volleyball team began. One part that I didn't put in the film was the reason the Chinese women's volleyball team was so great was because they were trained by one of the greatest Japanese coach in the 60s, and the Japanese coach was personally invited by Premier Zhou Enlai to come to China, and he trained the first generation of Chinese team, which was actually the generation before the people we see in the 80s, in the late 70s. And they were all trained by this Japanese coach. And somehow the Chinese women's volleyball team and their technique were somehow a legacy of one of the greatest Japanese coach. That part I didn't put in the film because it could probably be a bit too politically sensitive. But somehow the relationship between the Japanese team and the Chinese team was actually pretty non-adversarial. But of course, when you're on the court trying to play each other, they're your enemy. But deep down, if you see some documentary footages, they were very friendly.
And what is the situation like now in China, recovered from the pandemic? I saw a wonderful documentary about this, Wuhan.
Yes, I'm not sure that I can give a very precise answer to that question. The fact that I'm a Hong Kong director, and since the movie was supposed to be released in the late January, Chinese New Year, and I did my premiere on the 19th of January, and then I did a lot of junkets, and I left on the 22nd. I haven't been back in mainland China. I was in Hong Kong. I know Hong Kong is China, but Hong Kong is quite different in terms of the pandemic. We're still having 100 cases a day, which is pretty bad for Hong Kong. I mean, of course, it's not in comparison to the U.S. or Europe, but somehow with 7 million population, we have like 100 cases a day, and we still carry on our life as not as usual, but it's still pretty much in a scare. But I've been told that economic activities has resumed a great deal. Cinemas are opened. I mean, cinemas are all closed in Hong Kong this last month again, with the fourth wave of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's very hard for me to gauge. I haven't been able to fly to China at all. I wasn't even in Beijing for the final release of the film in late September because I had to be quarantined. And then we were presented with the Chinese Oscars in the beginning of December. No, actually late November, on November 28th. And I was trying to fly there for that. And then it needed a 21-day quarantine, which I couldn't make. So I actually haven't been in China in the last 11 months.
Now, one contrast that might be observed between China and the U.S. when it comes to competitive sports is that in the U.S., the notion of individualism and competitiveness against everyone else is a natural ideology and in harmony with the idea of competition. But in China, the collective idea is embraced. So how would you say that contradiction plays out culturally in China and perhaps in your film as well, the collective and the communal versus individualism and competitiveness?
It's in a volleyball sports because it's a team sports anyway, so it is not as individualistic as tennis per se. Because I just did a film about a tennis champion, and so it's very different. My other film about the tennis Grand Slam champion is completely individualistic because tennis is very much about one person.
Yeah.
But however, like I said, I did show a certain degree of attitude or values changes between the players, and dealing with questions like why do you play volleyball? Do you love volleyball? Are you playing for your country? Or are you playing for yourself? Are you playing for your parents? Stuff like that. So to that extent, there is a difference between the players in the 80s and the players now, the national team now. But is that so much difference? I think for the players today, I think the difference is it's not that big, between a U.S. team and the Chinese team. But the players in the 80s, also because of the fact that that's, where China was at in the situation of what's going on in China as a society and as a people. I mean, the kind of sacrifice, the kind of playing for your country is probably, I know team sports, when the national anthem and the flag was raised, everybody is proud to a certain extent. But I think it probably meant more in the 80s for the Chinese players than players from anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But today, I would think they're probably pretty similar or compatible.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter Chan, for calling into our show.
Right.
And the best of luck at the Oscars.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
and the Oscars will be taking place April 25th, 2021. And we'll go out now on Arts Express with Broe on the Global Television Beat, with his top small screen picks of the year, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that he watched 140 of them so you don't have to. First, a little of one of his picks, Home Before Dark.
You know the results of the latest Gallup poll? Half the country never even heard of the word Watergate. Nobody. You guys are probably pretty tired, right? Well, you should be. Go on home. Get a nice hot bath. Rest up 15 minutes. And get your asses back in gear. We're under a lot of pressure, you know, and you put us there. Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution. No freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country.
Is that Dad?
My best friend. He was taken right in front of me.
I want to see the police report for Richie Fife.
Can someone deal with this?
I'm not going away.
People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange.
This is Broe on the Global Television Beat, Breaking Glass. Today's episode, The Year of Living Digitally, 2020 Top 30 Global TV Series. I watched 140 series this year and was able to cull a top 30, which, with some categories combined, is really 35. Thus, 1/4 of the series I watched were praiseworthy, a high number, but that does not count maybe 400 series I monitored and then passed because too derivative of other earlier better series and films, or whose subject matter and treatment promise socially irrelevant diversion and not particularly well executed diversion at that. This mediocrity will accelerate in 2021 with the entry of more money into the conglomerate streaming race. This year's top 30 from 12 countries also expands the notion of series, including one retro anthology series that today looks more prescient than ever, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, discoveries of previous series based on this year's creators, Misha Lovecraft Country Green's Undercover, and weekly and topical news and commentary series necessary in the age of Trump and Biden, RT's Redacted Tonight, Seth Meyers and Amber Ruffin on Late Night. Also included is one shining moment of truth-telling, Ricky Gervais' Golden Globes monologue that, because it was so honest, stood out like a sore thumb, not only during award season, but for the entire television year. And forthwith, the top 20. Home Before Dark. First great series from Apple TV Plus about a preteen journalist whose truth-telling exposes the embedded masculine power structure in a small town in Washington state. Hildy's online dispatches bring together an African-American boy and an Asian-American girl, a female deputy who must question her male superior, and the pint-sized reporter's lawyer mother, all to right a past injustice visited on the area's indigenous Yakuma population. Superbly differentiated characters and an exceptional cast highlight the storytelling. A Christmas Carol. Stephen Peaky Blinders Knight's answered a Christmas drivel like Jingle Jangle. Knight's imagining of a nearly unrepentant Scrooge as prototype capitalist owner resounded throughout this year of Jeff Bezos profiting from his own Tiny Tims without allowing them bathroom breaks. Knight's version is a very peaky and very profound reimagining of Dickens' tale, which had lost its bite in too many syrupy retellings. Bad Banks. Fintech, the infiltration of the tech industry by the financial industry, is the subject of Season 2 of this superb German series. Jenna's mega bank expands and she's sent to corrupt a startup designed in its idealistic phase to aid sustainable development. This interpenetration reminds us of a moment long ago and many galaxies away when Google's motto was "Don't do evil," a moral imperative now become a punchline. For Life. This series, produced by 50 Cent and based on a true story about a black prisoner who became a criminal lawyer and defended inmates, was in the year of Black Lives Matter's questioning of the criminal justice system, a clear-eyed and penetrating look at how justice in the U.S. and the West is lined against minority defendants. Aaron Walsh's struggle against a corrupt prosecutor played alongside and amplified calls in the street for police and justice to be halted. Berlin, Babylon, or Babylon, Berlin. Season 3 found police detective Gerion Rath and his female accomplice Charlotte Ritter drawn ever further into the developing fascist morass that will eventually spell the end of the Weimar Republic. A financier Nazi sympathizer preaches chaos as the stock market collapses and the army and the police reveal themselves to be centers of a fascist cover-up. Amidst this carnage, Gerion and Charlotte are more hard-pressed than ever to defend the fading democracy, and Gerion is introduced to a new book titled Mein Kampf. Couldn't be more prescient as Proud Boys take to the streets to support Trump's attempted coup, perhaps brandishing copies of Art of the Deal, this generation's fascist manifesto. If this isn't Weimar, it certainly is Weimar-ish. The Valhalla Murders. This Icelandic series, now on Netflix, begins in a very cliched serial killer romp involving the long-ago psychological debris of the violence of a boarding school. Stay with it, though, because the series at its midpoint takes a surprising turn as the effects of the initial exploitation work its way upwards to engulf layers of the criminal justice system, a stunningly effective and vastly underrated series. Normal People. This BBC and Hulu co-production, based on the Sally Rooney novel, is an acute examination of not just the triumph and the pain of a first love, but also the horrific and persistent ways that class divides people as we watch a working-class boy and an upper-class girl ultimately find each other and fall victim to the layers of distrust in themselves and in Irish and capitalist society as a whole. Money Heist. Seasons 3 and 4 on Netflix attempt to disprove the age-old adage that you can't go home again, or in this case, you can't rob Spain's national bank after robbing its national mint. The professor and his team this time are melting down gold in the post-U.S. dollar world, where countries are hoarding this precious commodity ahead of a U.S. currency collapse. The season should have concluded the robbery, but the streaming service opted to delay the outcome to pique interest in another season, a move which weakened Season 4. George Scott. This Swedish series brought together various strands from other films and series and wove them into a new subgenre, ecological horror. Season 1 had forests, which cover half the area of the country, under pressure from a logging cabal, with a Stockholm detective in search of her long-lost daughter becoming ever more involved in the need to recognize and preserve a verdant nature being destroyed by greed. Season 2 had her returning to Stockholm, but with her connection to the forest nourishing her fight to protect it. Homecoming, Hightown. The high and low of the drug trade. Season 2 of Amazon's Homecoming has Janelle Monáe as supposed victim of a corporate pharmaceutical company that in Season 1 had annihilated veterans and cut loose an amnesiac, Julia Roberts. Season 2's only hero is another veteran who doggedly pursues the company's commercial lasciviousness and ties to the military. Hightown, on the other hand, charts the struggles of a Latina lesbian in drug-addled Provincetown as she keeps hitting deeper bottoms but refuses to give up on her quest to become a detective. Ricky Gervais' Golden Globes monologue. Last time for sure, the comedian and inspiration behind The Office will be asked back to what is more public relations stunt than acknowledgement of creativity. His mantra, as the monologue crossed the boundary from ribbing to active jabbing and exposing of the hypocrisy of liberal Hollywood, was, "I don't care." High point was the acquisition of a taboo subject in the entertainment world, the sweatshops in Asia that underlay Hollywood wealth. The disapproving look of the town's current wielder of soppy morality, Tom Hanks, priceless. Fearless, this 2018 series labeled at the time for the conspiratorially minded, instead has Peaky Blinders' Helen McCrory as a crusading attorney who uncovers a secret behind Tony Blair's criminal rush to enlist Britain in the Iraq War against the will of the country. McCrory's unearthing of the collateral damage of the war on British democracy as Blair blindly followed the U.S. President Bush is worth a second look in light of the upcoming verdict on the U.S. extradition of Julian Assange, with Britain as it supposedly embarks on its independent course post-Brexit, being asked again to surrender its sovereignty. Snowpiercer. Last year we got Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, perhaps the most astute analysis of class tensions and contradictions ever put on the screen. This year we have TNT and Netflix's series adaptation of his film Snowpiercer, about a class-segregated train that circles a globe frozen because of a failed technological attempt to subvert global warming. Daveed Diggs is stunning and resolute as the revolutionary who carries his struggle for the oppressed backenders to the head of the train. With the reports that 5 years after the Paris Accords the planet's temperatures have worsened, Snowpiercer is beginning to resemble not a far-off dystopia, but the evening news. Green Frontier, Colombian series on Netflix that centers on the Euro destruction of the Amazonian rainforest and the attempt by its indigenous and a female cop from Bogota to save the forest. While its Swedish compadre George Scott employs the tropes of horror, Green Frontier summons a Latin American mystical embrace of magical realism and its depiction of the timeless quality of the forest protectors versus the contemporary assault of loggers, corrupt law officials, and a mysterious ex-Nazi linked to the history of European exploitation of the continent. This is Broe on the Global Television Beat, signing off.
And Broe's picks for the year to be continued. And that's all we have time for today on Arts Express, Expression in the Arts. And if you'd like to express yourself too, you can write to us at theradiogoddess@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Prairie Miller leaving the station.
Wake up all the builders, time to build a new land. I know we could do it if we all lend a hand. The only thing we have to do is put it in our minds. Surely things will work out. They do it every time. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. The world won't get no better. We gotta change it now, just you and me. Change it, yeah, just you and me. Change it, yeah, change it.